and welcome to another episode of Wrenches, Gadgets, and Hacks. We are back again for episode number 3. The numbers are getting bigger of the podcast about AEC gadgets and technology for everyone in the AECO industry and beyond. I will be your host, Carl Storms, with again our ever so gracious guest host for this series, John Pearson. Welcome back, John.
Thank you for having me. Glad you haven't kicked me out yet. I think I'll say that
No,
every time.
I think you should because it's true. We would never kick you out. And this series episode, or this episode, if I want to be more succinct, Sarah Causey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello. Nice to see you again. Virtually, of course.
Of course,
Not quite the same.
it definitely is not the same, but we're doing this series here where we're talking about, people sort of what they like to do off the clock, not just on the clock. You when we were discussing off camera, you brought up the idea of passion project, which I think is a beautiful way to describe it. But before we go down that road, maybe you can sort of tell the wonderful people that are listening, all three of them, what it is that you do and when you're on the clock.
Okay. Well, my current title, although I tell everyone they can call me Rumpelstiltskin, I just want to do cool stuff, is Manager of Design Technology. But yeah, so my background is kind of non-linear path, like many of us in this tech space. But I love technology. I love how it integrates with design and the impact it has on people in the future and how they inhabit space. So this sort of cross section seems to suit my soul.
Right, we like people that are on the show where we are soothing their souls with what we're doing as we walk through this. So I guess the first question that I will ask, now that you've introduced us to you so well, is what is it that you would consider a passion project? And I keep harping on that word because it hadn't even crossed my mind to call it that way. To me, it was just, it's tech. I like it. I play with it, after the hours. But I think that's
I
a
always said
really
screwing around, and passion project's a way better way to put that. Here's what I screw around with after.
see.
It's okay. Well, if I really am being honest with y'all, back in the early pandemic days, I sort of working at a previous firm called Ratio, which I loved. I loved that firm so much. I switched gears and my role moved a little bit out of the day to day doing the fun, cool, sexy tech stuff and into a more managerial role. Maybe y'all can relate. Maybe other people listening can relate. So I spent a lot more time in Word and Excel and budgets and spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations, and which was a great opportunity to learn about management and strategy and the ways that we conduct internal marketing. But it took me away from the fun, the technology, getting my feet wet, hands dirty. I always say them backwards. Those two sayings. So I had a mentor who really expressed to me how important it was to keep some sort of part, whether it's your foot, your hand, or something, in the work. Otherwise, you get too far detached. And what brought us into this space and what drives us isn't Excel or Word or PowerPoint. So although we might be best suited to manage or to lead, we have to stay somehow connected to technology or we lose it and get burnout. So I learned that really well. And since then, the space that I've been playing in, John, having fun playing, screwing around, is the Unreal Engine. And I am not a gamer. I want to go ahead and say that because I know that's abnormal for most. But when the concept of smart cities came out, and then buddy Ian Siegel, who I worked with in New York City, started working for Willow, and I found out all about that, I was like, man, there's a lot of potential here. And I decided, if that potential is not in Revit, which I don't believe that it is, and frankly, I'm not sure that I see it in tandem as well. Where is it? What engine, what space, what technology that exists has the capacity to hold an entire city, an entire environment, and all of that data? And for me, it was clear it was either Unity or Unreal. And I personally, and gladly now in hindsight, I'm glad I put my eggs in the Unreal Engine basket because that seems to be living and breathing. Although, if you watched the GTC keynote last week, maybe Omniverse, I need to put a foot in that too. But this is my screwing around space. So I hope that
There you go.
answers that.
For sure. And Unity's interesting because they changed a lot of their like terms and conditions over something to where people are going to get some crazy bills involved from what I saw on
Yes.
Twitter and stuff a while back. And I've always liked Unreal more myself as well because Unity I always thought it didn't look quite as good as Unreal Engine did. But yeah, it's definitely a good basket to put all the eggs in, right?
Yes. Sorry if you hear my dog in the background. That's Roscoe. He has lots to
He
say
likes
about
Unreal as
getting the
well.
engine.
Nice.
And I think it's interesting too, the point on not being a gamer and using these things, because there's another thing out there, Discord, which is technically for gamers to chat on, completely unrelated, but it's gaming. Hypar has their whole community on Discord, and me as like I'm not even a gamer either. I jumped on Discord and there's all these like gamer terms, and I was like, what the heck is this? But it's basically Slack. Kind of an interesting
Yeah.
parallel from a lot of the stuff in our industry and people getting used to WASD controls and all those kind of things too.
It is different and there's a lot to learn, but it also is so, I don't know, it feels so close to what we do, especially if you've worked in Viz. I mean,
Yeah,
Twinmotion is like the gateway drug to the Unreal Engine, right? Especially because
absolutely.
it's pretty affordable. But I don't know. I think I got a chance to go to Unreal Fest last year. Their AU, right? Their conference in New Orleans, and there weren't that many architecture firms there. Not that I was surprised by that, but I just it feels so closely connected and closely tied to the way that we work that I hope to see that grow. I really think it's going to, whether you're doing an animation or a rendering or even just getting ready to do, I mean, John, you're talking about 3D printing. If you're going to print topography, you have to do all this setup to create an environment, a scene or a world. So
Mm,
it's not that different. It's just technically learning, just like any tool, new keys, new shortcuts, new terminology. The blueprints are a lot like, it's way different, but it's a lot like Grasshopper or Dynamo. It's just visual
yeah,
based spaghetti nodes.
exactly. And they do a lot of stuff with material editors that are visual programming, I think, right? In Unreal. Very cool stuff. And Twinmotion, they just recently announced that it's going to be free if your revenue is less than 1 million annually, I think, which is pretty
Yes. So
epic
that's
for smaller firms.
Yes, and that's always been their MO. So this is how it diverges from Unity. So their MO has always been, even in the gaming industry, supporting individual or indie gamers and really making the community come up with tools. So until you reach that $1 million mark, they don't collect revenue. But then when you become big, they get, a slice of the pie for forever. So
Yeah,
I think it's a good business model.
for sure.
I think it's an interesting way of doing that, and it's funny. I've ran into a couple things that we've talked about here. The model that we're talking about, where until you get to $1 million, they don't collect revenue. I've been going through an AI challenge where I'm doing a different AI tool sort of every day. But there's a lot of platforms that have glommed onto the idea that because if you go to ChatGPT, it's $20 a month. So just out of the box, everything. Then there's no real way to test it or try it or to understand it. And if you're just going to be in there for a little bit to have that free version that actually gives you some power, like you could actually do some stuff, it makes sense because then you're going to become a little bit loyal to that platform. You're going to be able to actually try it beyond just simply, hey, look, it'll do this one thing. You can actually spend some time and get in there. So I think that's a brilliant, I think that's a great way to look at it, to put it in place and to get it together. There's a
And you
better way
can
to say
tell
that, but
they're
yes.
No, I'm with you, and then you can tell that their priority is not in making money, it's creating a culture of equity to technology, and not everybody sees it that way, but I think that's the way we wanna move forward as a world, you know?
It does. It helps if you have a little something in the back making money called Fortnite, that basically prints it for you. So that helps a little bit. If you don't have to bootstrap everything, it kind of helps to be philanthropic when there's money in the bank. It's absolutely right though. They could have easily just not went that way and kept all that money. So I mean that's how
Now
things
what's
like Twinmotion came
interesting
about.
That's right, and they actually acquired Twinmotion, which is fascinating,
Mm.
but what's interesting with Fortnite is there's a split that's happening right now, and it's gonna be curious to watch, where the Unreal Engine, the traditional engine, the one that I work in and build digital twins in because of the data integration, will remain. But there's a parallel path, which is UEFN, which is UE Fortnite. And the style, the way it's programmed, everything is really Fortnite based. And there's a lot of games and movies and different things being developed. And it's an entirely different backend. So you have to learn a different language to work in UEFN. So again, that doesn't necessarily apply to my passion project, but it could be depending on what you're after. So that's going to be interesting to watch. Hopefully they maintain both. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I don't know.
that
I'll
is
have to learn
interesting.
something new.
Yeah, there you go. Then you'll have to have everything built in that Fortnite way.
No, I don't want that.
Well, there's
Unreal's
always.
interesting too. Oh,
Go ahead,
Carl.
John. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say all this stuff, like we were talking about Twinmotion a lot, built on Unreal. There's something else I saw recently called Cesium on LinkedIn.
CCM. Yeah, CCM
CCM?
is great.
Oh man, I saw that and I was like, holy smokes. Like, oh, we're over here using open street maps like in Dynamo and stuff, and these guys are like building whole worlds, right? Like
Oh
nuts.
my gosh. It's amazing. And, not just CCM, but there's an entire, oh Lord, I'm going to get this wrong. This is what happens when you are on a live podcast. Ge- open geospatial. I'm going to have to look it up and then you can link to it. I think it's called Open Geospatial Consortium, something like that. Anyway, it's a group of people, companies like CCM, like Esri, like all of the, these GIS based companies who are preparing for the metaverse are coming together to create some sort of standardization and collaborate, which I think is wonderful for us. It's going to benefit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier about smart cities, the ability to be able to tap into that stuff and have those things to create that smart city, to have that data, to be able to see those topographies and the buildings that are there. I mean, if you remember back when we had nothing and then Google bought SketchUp and people were starting to make their, they would just go over the thing and they would make the square, but at least it's something. And you can still see that today up here in the Great White North, where we have no wonderful technology like that in our cities, but you start to see that they have these when you go to the places where there was a couple of kids, that were young that knew SketchUp back when it was Google SketchUp. And all of these things are done. You go in the middle of nowhere and it's just flat topography.
Yeah.
And then somebody had the ability to get this tool added in there, and there's all this 3D, and it makes a difference because it can start being built on. So the idea of having that and being able to do that and tie into it, which I think is what a lot of like Esri and OpenGS and all OpenGIS is trying to do, to give you that functionality to be able to do that, and then take on the whole other world of getting the digital twins and smart cities and bringing that into place.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy from the Netherlands last week, and he was telling me that the US maybe is, and I'm not sure about Canada, but maybe lagging behind some of the smaller, the much smaller countries in Europe because everything is already mapped out. It's all digitized. You can get every parcel, every road, everything. And that blew my mind because there's so much of the US that I wonder if it's even been drone mapped at all.
I think part of that is the size as well. When you have some of those smaller Scandinavian countries, they're very forward thinking. They're good with tech, like they have a lot of great things, but they're also a much literally smaller piece of the pie to map out. We have places here that haven't even been explored yet, let alone
Right.
mapped out and droned and all that sort of stuff. So there becomes some logistics to it, but that doesn't mean that it can't start working on the bigger places where everybody uses it, right?
Yep.
One of the other things that we were talking about, John brought up, gamers, even though if you're not gaming, using Discord, sort of kind of like Slack. One of the things that I've seen people start to do now, or companies, particular AI, is there's quite a few of those AI rendering engines like DALL-E 2 or 3 that are actually built on Discord. Like you have to log into Discord and you have to use their Discord channel to actually access the power. I don't know where that ties into the thing, but just the fact that, it was a Slack that was for chatting about games, and now they have all this power on the back end to do GP rendering.
I think it's fabulous. I don't know. I mean, maybe 10 years from now we'll look back on this podcast and realize we did something wrong, but I just think it just shows that the future of technology is in the hands of the users. At least it feels that way to me. Like we are all going there together. It's less about I mean, everything is open and everyone is sharing and talking to each other, which is the community I want to live in. I mean, design tech's always been that way, but it takes a little bit of power away from these software mega houses and puts it back into the user. So I hope it stays that way.
For
Agreed.
sure.
And I think what people are also seeing is that from that, if you give that little bit of openness, if you open up a little bit of your technology, your workflow, but then more people can get involved. And I know a lot of the bigger companies are starting to see the value in this, of saying, hey, well, why don't we let everyone have access to the APIs or the code? And look at that. We get all these things back that we didn't have to invest in. And again, it's good for everyone, but sometimes it's hard for people to understand that opening up that little bit gives you so much in return. We got very deep and philosophical here so early on in the episode.
Sorry.
Well, then kind of thinking on that community of sharing and everything. So did you know Unreal Engine before kind of tackling or going after this passion project? Was it something that you messed around previous?
I didn't know the engine at all. So I knew Twinmotion and
Okay.
wanted, thought, okay, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to go. And I started watching just their training resources. Okay, so first of all, there's a wealth of training resources if you're getting into gaming tech. So one, Unreal has all of this stuff on their website, just both in written and in video. But they also have a Unreal Developer Network, which, like most, Autodesk, same way with the forums, but the developer network is super active. So you ask a question, people actually respond,
Yeah.
which is fabulous. And then there's a whole host. Now, this is good and bad, but there's a whole host of people out there sharing videos on YouTube of ways to do things. And as the versions change, and I'm not sure if I'm learning the best practice or not, but I'm really glad to get a free education. And a lot of people have Patreon accounts that you can contribute to. But I'm so grateful to the community because that's how I learned. I'm sure y'all are the same way. We just try things and watch videos and figure it out.
For
So I
sure.
would recommend, there's a huge learning curve, especially on the blueprint side, but you don't have to invest money and go into a training center. You can just watch stuff online if you have the time.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just being able to learn things like that is really great. And then like with Twinmotion, you're able to get like a lot of our Revit stuff out into something else nowadays. I remember, gosh, it was back in 2016 or something. I think Jeff, the Revit kid, had a tutorial on getting a Revit model to Unreal, and it was like this crazy process. And like it's not
Oh my
like that
gosh.
these days.
I need to go find that just to appreciate what I've
It
got.
was
But yeah,
terrible.
data,
Yeah.
I'm sure. So there's Datasmith plugins for everything. I mean, you can come out of Blender, you can come out of, anything, pretty much, Rhino, whatever, into Unreal. So that's really created a common data format for people to work in. And there's plugins for almost anything. And Sketchfab also has so much content that you can create and put into or pull down. And, even with reality capture tools, you can pretty quickly make something that looks pretty decent and throw it in your model. So I think it has come a long way. If you're just looking for Viz, like if you're moving from Twinmotion to Unreal, you've got to have a good reason because Twinmotion does a lot, and you actually lose some capabilities when you go into Unreal, like the quick ease of changing seasons and time that Twinmotion offers. That's not easy in Unreal. But if you're looking to create buttons or a user interface or data overlays, you kind of have to level up. And so that's really the dividing line between the two. I'd say if anyone's listening, they haven't tried either, start in Twinmotion for sure because it's a lot more intuitive.
For sure. And then all those data points that you're tracking, like for your digital twin, you're overlaying those with like, I imagine, really neat UIs that you interact with and show usage of spaces and all this cool stuff. And yeah, Twinmotion's definitely for Viz. But yeah, I remember, is Tandem even still a thing anymore? It is? Like it is?
I
Okay.
I think so. I think so. And it's not bad. It's just the customizability and the high level of quality that we're looking for. You can't necessarily achieve. So it's just different use cases. I don't think there's anything
Mhm.
wrong with it. But there's a tool, there's a plugin from the marketplace that we use that actually have helped the guys sort of flesh out and develop over in Scotland and in the UK called Data Sculpt. So if you're in Unreal and you're looking to connect to data and make heat map visuals or different kinds of data displays, Data Sculpt I would offer as something to look into. And they actually act as the broker as well for any data streams you're coming through. So there's kind of, I don't know how technical you want me to get on this, Carl, but there's
You
kind
go
of
deep.
okay. There's kind of two philosophies when you're connecting data to a digital twin, specifically Unreal, but any digital twin tool from viz to data. That's what okay, a digital twin is not a BIM model. I said it. If somebody gets mad at me, I don't care. That's not a digital twin. You have to connect to data. It's some sort of fidelity rate, like live or every minute or every day, whatever. There has to be some sort of exchange of information on a time loop to be a digital twin. Okay, now that I've said that, I'll get that out of the way. There's two ways in which you can interact with the data. One is you can have a data lake of some sort. Yes, John, I'm so glad you agree. You can have a data lake of some sort where you're consuming all the data you want and then displaying it, which is fine. But the other concept, which I think is probably going to have more validity in the long term, is what's called the digital thread. Not sure if everyone's familiar with that, but in case not, it's just the concept of instead of pooling the data in one place, displaying it there, you're just creating a thread to the original data's location. So if it's JSON that you're just calling an HTTP request from, great, because maybe that location needs a certain level of security and is updated frequently, or for some reason it's your clients and your owners and they want to hold their data and they don't want you to hold their data. So you're just connecting through. And I think the latter is probably a safer space from a resilience standpoint for the future, because then you could have just threads to everywhere and start to look like a murder mystery with like red string all over the place. And I don't know that I don't know that architecture firms want to be in the business of holding data. That feels like a liability issue. So there's my little technical off trail there. Sorry.
I like it.
No,
I
I
like
think
it.
that's awesome. And I like that idea of just feeding the data directly because, like you said, having data stored is just like, it always makes people a little uneasy when it comes to certain projects as well, you know? So having that stuff fed in is really great. And then another point about how BIM is not going to be a digital twin. I mean, a lot of these things are proprietary file formats. Like, I'm not going to be able to send that to everyone, you know, and something that I can open up in a web viewer or whatever is way nicer in that way, for sure.
Yeah,
And
I
I
just
mean,
want to make sure people understand. I think the byproduct of the design process, whether it's an as-built or an FM model or just a design intent model, is the foundation, a great foundation for digital twin, but it's not yet there.
and for what kind of, so the data that you are tracking, you're feeding that from various sensors and things like that into your digital twin? Okay, cool. I
Yeah,
back,
so
oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. No, finish that thought.
I was gonna say back a long time ago, we had like a little, when I was at an architecture firm, we had like a little Raspberry Pi feeding like humidity and temperature into some dashboard, and we were all blown away by it way back then. So like, I just imagine that the state of sensors and tracking is just insane these days.
Yeah, so you were halfway there, right? So it's just now that the hardware and the speed and technology, well, computing power, frankly, has gotten to a state where it makes more sense. You're just connecting that old dashboard that you had back then to some sort of visual. That's it. It's that simple. And it's so valuable because for a lot of people who don't live and breathe AEC like we do, like viewing a floor plan and viewing it in our brains in 3D. If you're not capable of doing that, it's the same case when you look at a dashboard. Like, okay, there's a spike on this. Okay, cool. It's a pie chart or a bar graph. But the minute you put it over 3D space, especially with some sort of either a color or warnings or it depends on what your use case is. Okay, there's understanding now, and you don't necessarily need to know about buildings to get to conclusions faster or make decisions faster, which is really the power of this and why I'm excited about it.
For sure. And yeah, just having that data is great. I mean, even in my own house, I have temperature sensors like in my garage and my freezer in the garage because I found out a few months ago my freezer in the garage was doing this defrost thing. So I reached in and got some food out, and I was like, this feels kind of soft. What the heck's going on? So I put a temperature sensor, and I started to see this going on. And I was like, oh, that's no good. I had to throw away a lot of stuff. But like even having data in my own house like that was so rewarding in that way. And I mean, I didn't get food poisoning after all, so that's good, but
Yay.
it's just seeing all that kind of stuff come to fruition is really neat, even if it's something as small as throwing a temperature sensor somewhere, I think that's always really cool. And people were looking at it a long time ago for comfort of office settings, and things like that. And it's neat to see it finally come around to where we have the hardware to do it and those things. I think it was AU 2015. It was the last AU that Carl Bass did the keynote. He was the CEO still. He talked about Internet of Things, and it was a
Mhm.
super exciting thing. And he was going off about how your toaster will talk to the cloud and all this. And it was like, wow, that's going to be insane. And then here we are all these years later, and we're finally having things that start to talk to things. So it's like cool.
What's interesting, and I think it's a benefit to us in AEC, is that the progression and the innovation is happening much more quickly in other industries. Newsflash, we're always last. Like we get this, we know this, unfortunately. So when you think about designing an airplane engine or automotive industry or smaller scale designs that have parts and pieces that they're tracking live, but also simulating the future, like we do with the design prototype phase, what digital twins provides is so fascinating, and we're able to sort of mimic that in the built environment now. But it's not just I just want to elaborate, it's not just for benefit of live tracking and even historical trending, which sounds like for your freezer was great. Like that's real money savings if you're in a building and you're seeing this 500 times of this problem triggering. But with the incorporation of AI, we are now capable of going into the future. It's like time travel. Like I can go back and look at this, but now I can predict things about what's going to happen with the performance of my engine or my car or my medical device or my building. The hard thing, the challenge we have that's unique in AEC is that in order to properly simulate the performance or the future of a building, you have to get human behavior right. And oh man, how far do we have to go to get AI to understand? We don't even understand human behavior, but it makes me think a lot. Like I can simulate AI avatars or actors in Unreal moving around a space. We can use computational design to figure out pathways that are most efficient or problems in a schedule in a hospital or et cetera, et cetera. But to really predict how a change will truly affect human behavior, I just want to be a part of the journey, but I do not have the answers.
Yeah, for sure.
It's going to
That
be fascinating.
I
We
think
always
so.
oh yeah, I
I,
mean human behavior is just so interesting. Like we've had clients that we meet with for automating things, and we're like, explain how you do it. And a lot of times they're like, oh yeah, it's just you do this. And we're like, record yourself doing this task for a little bit, and then we'll see what it really takes to do this task. And that's an idea that I like. I stole from Andrew Human when he was at WeWork, but they recorded their designers working, laying out office buildings at WeWork, office spaces. And like one person will do it this way, one person will do it this way. Same thing navigating space or being comfortable in a space or whatever it is that they're doing. It's just pretty unpredictable. And I don't know how to fix that either.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's now the time to really draw all sorts of weather information, the IoT, all the sensors that are happening in buildings that are disparate and no one's looking at holistically. One of the projects, I think it's okay that I talk about this because we feature it on the Implexus website, but one of the projects we are still working on in development, it just keeps evolving, is with Argonne National Laboratories. So they've got a nuclear test loop and they have, this reactor grade sodium, they're heating to like 600 degrees, like crazy temps, depending on absolute or relative temperature, whatever you're looking at. And these sensors are just hanging out there. It's not like rocket science, but they're able to really use the twin to see and predict problems. And when you're talking nuclear, like that's a pretty important situation where you want to really detect these problems. And so maybe it's not as same of a life safety impact in buildings, but if nobody ever uses this conference room and you can't figure out why, and it's because the weather and the sun comes in this way and the automatic roller shades aren't working and human behavior doesn't want to be hot, like, okay, we can make changes to the design and make the space better. And we are doing some of that as an industry with pre and post occupancy evaluations. And I think that's a great space for AEC to start building short term digital twins. I mean, might as well. You got data and you just animate, I don't know, 6 weeks, whatever you're capturing. But really, I'd love to see that loop of coming in and doing research, doing the design, and then walking away come full circle so that we can just pull the data, see the twin, make design decisions, make the buildings better. So I think there's potential. I just think it's gonna happen. Do you feel that?
I
Is it
think
just me?
no, I see a future too to where people are interacting with a digital twin with headsets and all this crap. Like I see all that like happening too. It's just really interesting. Like years ago too, I keep referencing AU stuff, but we saw all the hard hats with the little screen thing as well and interacting with models. And I see that potentially happening in the future as well with digital twins in general.
Have y'all tried the Apple Vision Pro? I have
I
not.
haven't yet. I want to try it because supposedly it's one of the more mind-blowing ones. I just haven't had a chance.
I'd
Like
like to
schedule an
try.
appointment and go in there and all this stuff.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah,
Carl, we just got to get someone whose passion project is VR on here or
there we go.
AR.
We could
Now
do
it'll
that.
be in person.
We talked last week. Jason suggested that maybe Apple should sponsor us. So this is two episodes in a row.
Oh,
We've talked Apple. We're happy to test hardware.
I'm
There you
wearing
go.
the new Apple Max headphones. How can
See,
I
I got
promote Apple
AirPods.
so they will sponsor you?
it's
There you
all
go.
over. All good. All good. So it's funny, but that brings us right where we'd like to keep this to a nice, tight, and concise half hour. Although there's been so much great stuff, we will definitely have to have it back. But I have three things to bring us home. So the first
Okay.
is you gave your little rant, as you like to call it, about how a BIM is not a digital twin.
Mhm.
And I think the reason being is we talked about the data. And if you just think about it, it's not called a BIM warehouse, a BIM lake, or a BIM thread. It's a data lake, a data warehouse, a data thread. So it's all about the data. It's not about the geometry, which leads to my next point, talking about digital twin. And I think sometimes the reason people have a hard time with the concept is when you say twin, everyone thinks visual. And as you even
Mm,
mentioned, it's not about what we're looking at. It's about the data behind it that we're representing, however we want to represent it. So when people
mm.
stop expecting to see the exact same thing and learn to be able to visualize the data, that's the important part, then I think a digital twin concept will click, at least for me anyways.
Mhm.
Does that seem to make, am I in the right spot, or am I bringing us out to sea?
You are, and really briefly, I'll just explain. There are 5 levels of digital twins, just like there are 5 LODs for BIM.
Nice.
There's 5 levels. Like people like odd numbers. So there's a descriptive. These are the ways I define them. By the way, I should say this is the way Implexus defines them. So level 1 is a descriptive twin. That's maybe asset data, some live readings of information in the model. So descriptive. Predictive. So that's when you start, predicting what might happen before it takes place. Maybe you know from your maintenance manuals that this piece is going to last 7 years. So about 6 years, it's like, hey, I predict this is going to go down, or it's trending data, etc. So descriptive, predictive. So that's when we sort of cross the threshold into machine learning aspects. So it's prescribing solutions to operate the facility better. I can't wait till we get there. I mean, let's go. It's from a sustainability standpoint. I'm so ready. And then autonomous, which I would like to add a sublevel of semi-autonomous, where it's not only prescribing, but there's certain parts of the facility you feel comfortable letting it operate itself. Not that far from the way our cars work and different things. So our houses, our thermostats at home maybe are already doing some semi-autonomous functionality. So I hope we get there. I feel like I just did that and I missed one. Oh, I did. I'm terrible. Descriptive, and the second level is diagnostic. So before we start predicting anything, there's an interaction with the users where they're diagnosing problems as they arise. So descriptive, diagnostic, predictive. prescriptive, and then some form of autonomous.
And just to be sure, somewhere, and I don't know where this is, but I just like to do this when we're doing the videos and talking. For those of
Future
you listening,
graphic.
I'm pointing down. Yeah, future graphic here. There will be a graphic describing all of those things. And before we get to the last part that everyone knows is coming, I do have one question. And if we take a little longer, that's all right. But we talked about sort of the passion project of working with the Unreal Engine and how that's sort of taking you down the road of digital twins. My question for you specifically, what part of that do you want to focus on? Like, are you focusing on the visualization of it? Are you focusing on streamlining the data of it? Are you focusing on being able to just share data and not have to pass the BIM around? I know that's
Great
a lot to ask
question.
for, I'm giving you this much time. For those watching, listening, a little bit of time.
Okay, so as of March 25th, the day we're recording this, 2024, which that could change. I don't know. The technology is evolving. My skill set, the people involved in Plexus Lab, because it's not just me, our skill sets are in Viz and in BIM. So if our role in this grander scheme of digital twins, because they can get quite complex, especially as you incorporate AI assistants and things like that, is the visualization side. It's what we're excited about. It's what we know. We're not super uncomfortable working in Unreal and connecting to the data, but we're not data scientists. We aren't, that's not our bread and butter. Will we move there one day? Maybe. But right now I like playing on the playground with other experts and doing what we do well and contributing.
That makes sense, and I love to hear, and that's why it is a passion project, because of that fun time on the playground that everybody has in place. And I keep teasing this last question, but things keep popping into my head. But before we get to the very, very end, if you would like to let people know how they can get a hold of you if they wanted to come play on that playground with you, this is your chance.
Yeah. So the passion project, the side hustle, is called Implexus Labs. Implexus is a Latin word for to embrace or entwine, and we like the thought of embracing or entwining the visual space with data. So that's where that word comes from, and it's implexuslab.com. So you can reach me there or check us out, or
Awesome.
I don't
And
know.
again,
I'm open to
graphic
friends.
below. We'll have it
Yes.
all there. And now that elusive last question, as our name says, Wrenches, Gadgets, and Hacks, we always like to have our guest end the episode with a hack of their choice for the topic of the episode. So I turn it to you.
This is a great hack. So if you, and I'm hoping it bleeds into or influences others in our space to hack this as well. If you're trying to learn Unreal and you're trying to learn blueprints, which is the hardest part, you can ask the latest version of ChatGPT. There is an entire machine who's been trained on Unreal blueprints. You can ask it anything and it will tell you how, which would have saved me a lot of time these last few years trying to figure it out. So it'd be great if we could have a Dynamo or a Grasshopper trained ChatGPT model in the future. But that is going to help you really make stuff really quickly because it's just spoon feeding it, and I love it.
That's
That is awesome. That is very awesome. And Soul, if you're listening out there, start training our own ChatGPT for Dynamo. That would be
Wouldn't that be great?
It would be.
It would be awesome, because a lot of what it predicts now with like the machine learning prediction, it's like that's not what I wanted to do. So being able to ask questions naturally is always so cool, especially when learning new things. And something as intimidating as a new software, it's so neat that we have access to that. So that's a great hack for sure.
It is. And the flip side to that wonderful hack is that you also learn that no matter how much the machine has been trained, it can get things wrong. So you learn not only to ask questions, as John said, but you learn how to review the answers and make sure that you're not just accepting it. So there's a lot that comes from these interactions with AI, and that people don't grasp until they start using it. So the AI is not taking over; it's really helping us. It's elevating us up.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great episode. We are for sure having you back because this has been a great conversation. We blew past our 30 minutes, but sadly it is time to bring it in for a landing. So I want to thank everyone for joining us here today for another episode of Wrenches, Gadgets, and Hacks, where we explore the tools, techniques, and time-saving hacks that are shaping the future. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe. Again, there's that graphic below, and tune in for more insights of the wonderful world of AECO and technology. Until next time, keep building, innovating, and exploring the possibilities.
you.